I'm so grateful for the men, in my community, but just in the world in general, like the men in our society who can speak up and say, yeah, I'm struggling. I feel alone. I feel anxious that my partner's going to leave me. The best remedy for that guy who's sitting on the fence who doesn't want to share because he's afraid of what will happen is to see other men doing that and realizing that it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. I'm also quite vocal about healthy shame. I think the healthy shame is actually really powerful, really important. It's part of like that holding men accountable to saying, you can do better and you're better than this, and that thing you did wasn't skillful and it's not what you should be doing. And I think sometimes it's like we live in these extremes. Some people kind of shame too much, and then some people say, well, we need to get rid of all kinds of shame and just do whatever you want and follow your desires. And I do think we need a healthy dose of shame, a healthy dose of remorse, of saying, yeah, that action that I did was not skillful and not alignment with my values.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unhooked podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz. Today, I'm excited to share with you a recent interview I did on the Rebuilt Man podcast with my friend and colleague, Coach Frank Rich. He invited me on as his very first guest in his new Coach's Corner series, which shines a light on individuals and organizations making a real impact in the recovery space. In this conversation, we dive into my journey from addiction to freedom, the origins of Unhooked Academy, and the unique challenges men face when it comes to breaking free from porn. We also explored the importance of community, the role of healthy shame, and why vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Frank and I do come from different worldviews, but what we share is a deep commitment to helping men reclaim their power and live with integrity. I'm deeply honored to be featured on his show, and I'm grateful to share that conversation with you here today. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Frank Rich.
Guys, welcome to the Rebuilt Man podcast today. I am your host, Coach Frank Rich, and I have an amazing guest joining me here on today's show. Guys, we're excited to be rolling out a brand new series here in the Rebuilt Man called Coach's Corner, where the mission with these episodes is to shine light and bring some attention to individuals and organizations out there that are having massive impacts in the world of recovery and helping men find freedom in their own unique ways. And joining me on the show today is Jeremy Lipkowitz. He's the founder of Unhooked Academy. He's a former Buddhist monk, a meditation teacher, and an ICF certified executive coach who specializes in helping high achieving men overcome porn addiction and other compulsive behaviors. And in this conversation, we're going to dive into Jeremy's work and the things that he's doing over there at Unhooked Academy, and what makes some of his approaches unique, maybe from the things that we teach here at the Rebuilt Man and some of the other incredible organizations out there. So Jeremy, my brother, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, man. It really is a pleasure, and I love the work that you're doing. And I imagine there will be some things that are unique about my approach, but my guess is that we have way more in common than what we have different. So happy to explore the work that we're doing.
Absolutely, man. And I agree. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of parallels. And, once again, my goal is to really bring to light the things that you're doing and maybe hear about some of the impact that you're having with men out there. So kicking things off, man, just love for you to kind of tell us, what inspired you to start the Unhooked Academy and really begin to do this deep, meaningful, transformational, yet challenging work with men who struggle with porn addiction?
Yeah, well, it really comes from my own history with porn addiction, something that I struggled with, starting in my you know, early teenage years, but even going back to 8 or 9 years old, but then really escalating in college, uh, getting into that addiction and just seeing how devastating it was for my mental health, my relationships, my life, my sense of fulfillment. And then getting out of that addiction, finding a pathway out of that suffering and realizing how much better my life was. It really just turned my life around. And so, I started, that was a catapult for me teaching people about meditation and mindfulness. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that my origin story into the path of meditation and mindfulness was from my porn addiction. And there are a lot of guys out there who were struggling with that as well. And so I just started, talking about that topic, talking about my history with addiction, how I got out of it, and decided to start helping people with it.
Yeah. Very, very similar, right? And I think that's been kind of the common theme in people that do the kind of deep transformational work is oftentimes it's our own suffering and what we learn through that journey that we learn about ourselves, but we also see that there is useful tools for others that we can share. And I know that's brought a lot of purpose and meaning to my life. Jeremy, what year did you get free? And, what was the time period from finding your own freedom to starting uh, the more specific work with Unhooked?
Yeah, for me, it's very fortunate that I have a very clear memory of when I broke free because I was having my 25th birthday in India, and I had this kind of eat, pray, love journey, going to India, learning about meditation and all this stuff. But I remember very distinctly being in a hotel room in India, like sitting on the bed watching porn and just happy. This was like the day of my birthday. And I remember having this wake up call of like, what am I doing with my life? What is this this is the way I'm living my life. And so it was on my 25th birthday that I then traveled up to kind of northern parts of India into kind of Dharamshala, McLeod and started really getting into some of these meditation retreats. So 25 years old was when I had this turning point in my life and when I broke free. So I guess that was this point 14 years ago. That was a turning point for me, letting go of porn addiction, stopping watching porn and really getting into meditation. But it wasn't for a long time, wasn't many years until many years later that I started doing this work specifically with men. I did start teaching meditation, because that was a really important part of my transformation. So I started teaching other people about mindfulness, kind of a very secular approach to mindfulness, a non-religious, non-woo-woo approach to mindfulness. And so I started doing that and was teaching meditation for about 10 years. And it was about 10 years into teaching meditation that I started doing this work around porn addiction because I was seeing so many people come to me with this problem. People were coming to my meditation classes and then staying after and wanting to talk to me about their life and their issues. And I kept seeing this problem coming up, which was something that I resonated with so much. And so that's when I started shifting over. This was about 2018, so 7 years ago.
Yeah, incredible, man. I've been pretty vocal about men's coaches and teachers and whether it's in relationships or fitness or mental health or mindfulness, like if you're not addressing this specific area, because I think a lot of people will push it under the rug or pretend like it's not there. It's like, no, if we just learn to breathe a little bit or, if we work on the relationship, like we don't have to address the porn addiction. And, I've had many posts where I've talked specifically, like, if you're not addressing this with your men's clients, like you are letting them down. I think you and I would both agree that's probably one of the biggest epidemics that men are, facing in today's world and culture. And it's just rapidly growing. I think your story there with, 25, like we would call that kind of identity transformation. That's kind of the language that we would, use there. And in, 6 years of working with thousands of clients, like I can tell most of them will have this pivotal moment where something shifts, you feel something change inside of you. And it's that point, not that you may never look back, but your ability to navigate the difficulty waters will be different and you'll see yourself through a different lens. What have you learned about yourself, Jeremy? Maybe not with the journey from 14 years ago, but specifically in doing this type of work with men. Like what has that taught you about yourself?
Ooh, man. I mean, yeah, doing this work with men, like, I think the most important thing is just realizing the common humanity in all of this, the common humanity of the struggles that we all go through. All of the things that I've struggled with where I thought I was uniquely messed up or uniquely broken or just perverted in some way or an idiot in some way, and realizing that I'm not alone. It's that like this is a very human thing and that a lot of us, especially men, we go through similar things. And being in these men's groups, it's like the one that I run where I get to connect with guys every week and just hear about what's going on in their life. And I just realized so much that we have so much in common in terms of the fears and anxieties and insecurities. So that's probably the deepest thing I've learned in doing this work.
Yeah, I think we both, specialize in working with high performing men. And I think that's been the big wake up for me. Looking back years ago, like I definitely thought I was something wrong with me. And I think, even societally, people look at porn addiction as like, it's the loser, right? It's the guy that's like not pursuing things, like it's not, maybe running an organization or company. Like we've had very successful 8, 9 figure entrepreneurs. We've had pro athletes. We've had Wall Street bankers, lawyers, like the everyday doctor, the guy that, is shaking a hand at the finance department. It's like this issue is not void of anybody. Jeremy, what's one thing you wish you knew maybe about this space? Whether it's the difficulties or even, some of the deeper meaning behind it before you started the coaching work.
Before I started the coaching work,
Yeah. Like what's one thing you maybe wish you knew about what you were getting into? Cause I know I've definitely had my, wake ups like, yeah, I really wish I knew that's what I was getting into.
yeah, I mean, there's so much that I feel like I'm learning on a constant basis. There are so many times where the guys in my group or some of my one-on-one clients come to me with things that I had never even thought about and things that I have no idea how to address. Fortunately, my approach to coaching is not to give any answers necessarily, but it's just to kind of to challenge and support and hold space and do all these things where I don't need to have an answer. But there are so many things that I just, I'm constantly learning from the people I work with how to be a better man. And so I guess, I wish I would just kind of tell myself to go in with an open mind and see how much I can learn from my clients. Cause that's the greatest joy of being a coach in this area is, especially as you say, working with high performers. The reason that I do that is, I was a high performer. I was one of these high achieving, young men, just acing everything, wanting to be the best, captain of a sports team, very sociable, all these things. And so those are the people who I really resonate with, the people who have this exterior of success and having it all together, but then have this inner shame, this double life. And so I love getting to work with these guys who are killing it in life, but have these kind of internal struggles that they're battling against. So yeah, for me, it's just a joy to get to learn from my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that too. And I think you probably do some type of community work in there that for me, that's like the real meaningful stuff, man. Cause you bring collectively a group of guys that are, working towards a paired aimed vision together. It's like, the growth, transformation insights that kind of come out. It's like, I tell the guys on our calls, it's like my goal with these calls is to speak the least. And it's been cool to see a lot of, leaders kind of rise up and, really grab the wheel and start to bring the other guys down this journey with them. Diving into the actual work here and, transformational breakthroughs with guys, what do you, in your opinion, see as the biggest barrier that holds men back once they decide that they're committed to finding freedom? Like what's that biggest thing that holds them back? And how specifically do you, in your work at Unhook, address that specific problem?
Yeah, I think two things come to mind most quickly. One is just the addiction that we all have to the comfort zone, to the easy life, to the good life, not wanting to go through discomfort or go through difficult things. I mean, that comes up in so many different flavors, it manifests in so many different ways in our life, but just not wanting to do difficult work, whether it's physical or emotional work. And so that dependence on, comfort and pleasure and escapism, I think is one of the biggest things that holds people back. The other one that comes to mind is not wanting to be seen. I mean, shame, like wanting to isolate, not wanting to talk about your problems, especially if you're in a bad state, if you're going through something difficult. That's when we want to run away the most. And that's when, ironically, when we need to be seen the most, where we need to show up and get support from others and talk about, hey, I'm really struggling this week. So I'd say that the barrier is thinking, that I need to be healed before I can show up, that I need to be better, I need to be perfect before I can come and talk to the group. I think that is probably the biggest thing that keeps people from really healing.
How do you, if you got that guy that, is ready to do it, but he's, paralyzed with shame, right? It could be, our state of being, right? And it can carry over into our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, everything about us. So if, you had a client or a guy in your organization that like, you can just see, it's like, this guy's holding something back because of that shame. Like what is the key to maybe not unlocking something in him, but allowing him to step out of that into a higher state of consciousness?
I think, the best remedy for that is that guy seeing other men be courageous and share, and I feel so grateful for the guys in my community who do speak up and who do kind of say, man, I'm really struggling with this, or I relapsed and I feel, can I swear on this podcast? I don't know. I feel like a piece of shit, and so I'm so grateful for the men, in my community, but just in the world in general, like the men in our society who can speak up and say, yeah, I'm struggling. I feel alone. I feel anxious that my partner's going to leave me. The best remedy for that guy who's sitting on the fence, who doesn't want to share because he's afraid of what will happen, is to see other men doing that and realizing that it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. So I think, that's the best thing. That's the best medicine for that kind of guy.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And once again, it's that collective unity that really creates space for these guys. And that's been the same experience that we've seen as well, is when you have a guy that is on the fence, but he's beginning to see other guys like share their own struggles and uniques. You can start to see the glimmer in his eyes. It's like, all right, now we're starting to kind of get through to this. I know there's a lot of similarities and commonalities in the work that we do. And I'm sure if we really unpacked it, like it would be very, very similar. But, if you had to maybe point to one thing that's unique about whether it's your philosophy or your approach to, transformational work with guys struggling with porn, like what would you say separates you from Rebuilt Man and, the other hundreds of organizations that are out there that are providing this level of work for guys?
I think that I really do think that so much, like, as you were asking this question, I was kind of going through my head of like, okay, well, what is unique? And I was thinking about certain things. I'm like, my guess is, you're doing the exact same things of like, shifting identity, like not identifying with I am an addict, but, kind of shifting the identity of, no, I am more powerful than this thing. Another thing is for me, mindfulness, meditation training, like rewiring your mind and cultivating mental strength is a big one, but I'm guessing you do it just maybe in a different parlance. If I had to say one thing that's probably unique about me, and this might be true, it's, I think, different from you, is that for me, it's a non-faith-based kind of recovery. Like for me, there's no higher power. There's no need for connecting with God or anything like that. And that's just because I'm not a religious person, never have been. And my recovery didn't involve that. So for me, and also, my background is in kind of the sciences and genetics and so forth. I was always kind of a very rational, pragmatic, secular person. And so my recovery needed to be that. And I think a lot of the guys who do come into my community are looking for that. They're looking for a place, because there are a lot of recovery programs out there that, have a strong faith-based component to it. And that's really powerful for people who are people of faith. But for those of us who aren't, it's like, we're just kind of allergic to that in some ways. We can't kind of step into it because it just, it's a barrier to us. If somebody's saying you have to do this, and it's like, well, I just don't. So I don't know what to do from here. So for me, my approach is just a very secular, it's really about identifying who you want to be, what kind of a man do you want to be, where do you want to go, what are your values. There's a lot of commonalities because my guess is, part of what's important about that faith-based stuff is really identifying like your value system and what kind of a person do you want to be in relationship to God. And for us secular people, it's like, what's your moral value system anyway? It's like, do you want to be a good person? Do you want to practice compassion? Like, what's important to you at the end of the day? So that's a little bit, I'd say, about what makes me a little different.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. And that's why I was excited to kind of have you on here. Unfortunately, I think for those that have been brought up in the church, and that wasn't my story. I came to faith, very, very late in my life, 34 years old, after kind of, struggling just with meaning and purpose and all that stuff. But I've seen it in so many of our guys, because we do pull a dominant Christian audience. There's a faith foundation, but we separated it, which I think has allowed me, much like you, to bring in guys from all worldviews. We've had obviously 65%, men of a Christian faith, but we've had Muslims and Buddhist and Hindu and atheists and agnostics, and guys that have felt disconnected from the church because the guilt and shame that's sometimes wrapped up in that. It's like, they're like, it's just not being addressed, in my opinion, correctly through the church, which is another thing I've spoken very openly about, which is, in some places probably got me a little bit of heat, but it's also kind of shines a light and maybe allowed me to separate myself from the other true faith-based organizations. Now, I'm very open and transparent with, where God lies in my life, but it doesn't keep me from serving a man that maybe has a different perspective and different worldview. So no, I really appreciate all of that. Talked about it here before, this new industry, right? Internet porn is a new drug, 20, 25 years with maybe really 15 of it being accessible to the degree that it is. And, we got AI coming down the pipeline, and, God knows where, robots are going to play a role into all this. So, the battle that we're fighting is ever changing, which means our approaches are going to have to constantly change. With this being a new field and rapidly growing and evolving day over day, where do you see the industry going in the next 3 to 5 years? And, what are you kind of doing to get on the forefront of that and make sure you're ahead of the next wave?
Yeah, I mean, the industry is just, it's the Wild West out there. And I feel so sorry for, the young 12, 13-year-old boys who are growing up in this environment, in this ecosystem, because if I had access to what young kids have access to today, I mean, it would just be a train wreck. Like, at least when I was that age, like, you had to download a photo at a time, and you didn't know what you were getting, and it would download line by line. And, now it's just, with AI, it's really scary. It's really scary, and it's really dark. And, I think it's why, people like yourself and people like myself, is like, this kind of work is so important, because in the dark, this thing is festering. And unless we get people like you and me starting these conversations and shedding light on it, there's too much money behind it. I mean, the industry is bigger than all the sports leagues in the US combined. That's crazy. Bigger than NBA, NFL, MLB. There's so much money behind this thing. Of course, they're going to be prying into young kids' attention, because we live in that attention economy. So, I think just education, like, really, there's this, have you ever read that book, The Little Prince, The Petit Prince? Did you ever read that book? It's one of these classics. It was written like in the 1970s. It was kind of written for kids, but it was also written for adults. There's like deep philosophical lessons in there. It's a classic. There's this one vignette from that story where this, prince has to kind of pull out these weeds, these seedlings of the baobab tree while they're still small, because if he waits too long, they grow into these enormous trees that end up kind of destroying the planet. And it's this really powerful lesson of, you got to address these things while they're still small, before they have time to take root. that's the time to address it and to weed them out. And so that's a lesson that, I try to talk about with my guys and instill in myself as well, because, it's coming for us too, even if you're on a recovery journey. I mean, the lines are getting blurred and there's so many gray areas where OnlyFans creators are now on Instagram, basically creating porn on there. So it's a messy world out there.
Yeah, yeah, and it's only gonna get darker. And I have opinions that it's weaponized and tool to weaken the men. And I remember having a conversation with Fred Stoker, Every Man's Battle. It's a faith book, so it may not be one that you've read, but it was written 20 plus years ago. One of the first books kind of that really took off in the space. 5+ million copies sold. And for him, he was, a new father that had struggled for 20 plus years. And, a big inspiration from him was ending the generational curses, and I got a chance to interview him, and he came and spoke to our men. And, one thing that really shined through him, and probably the thing he was most excited about, was having raised 2 boys into manhood, fully pure, never struggled with it. And it's cool. And it's one thing we try to, encourage our men to do, if they're fathers or want to be, like, get this out of your life now, because you need to be equipped to handle these tough conversations, because it's coming for your children. Collectively as colleagues, Jeremy, you and I, like, outside of conversations like we're having here today, and I know we're going to do one for your show, what can we do, to make sure we truly unite and join forces, so we're reaching as many men as possible, and hopefully creating one day a porn-free world?
A great question. I think one of the things that I'm so passionate about, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just, ending the shame cycle that goes on, of shaming men for their sexuality or shaming men for their habits. It's like, what men need is not to be shamed into, correct behavior, but, to be supported and, to be honored and acknowledged and championed. I do think, I'm also quite vocal about healthy shame. I think the healthy shame is actually really powerful, really important, that we actually, it's part of, like, that holding men accountable to saying, you can do better and you're better than this. And that thing you did wasn't skillful and it's not, what you should be doing. And I think sometimes, it's like, we live in these extremes. Some people kind of shame too much. And then some people say, well, we need to get rid of all kinds of shame and just do whatever you want and follow your desires. And I do think we need a healthy dose of shame, a healthy dose of remorse, of saying, yeah, that action that I did was not skillful and not alignment with my values. But I think just, the work that we're doing of connecting, having conversations. Also, one thing I try to do is to be humble and have humility and be vulnerable myself about my own struggles. I was just telling the guys in my group a couple days ago, like, TikTok, the algorithm was figuring me out and it was starting to really hook me. And I had to, I told them I had to go in and reset the settings. And fortunately you can do that on TikTok, but I could see the way that it was hooking me and I was starting to get addicted to these reels. And so I had, to be honest about how nobody's perfect. I think we can be examples for men in that way.
Yeah, I love that, man. And it's something I've seen in the space sometimes with coaches and guys that are running groups. They try to pedestalize themselves and it's like, I got it all figured out. It's like, no, you don't, bro. Like, we're all navigating. Maybe it's not what it once was, but, more money, more problems, right? It's like, as you kind of navigate up the ladder, it's like the struggles and challenges are going to, maybe sometimes get deeper and darker. And I love the topic of healthy shame, right? I think for men and women need some of that. Like, I think we need body shaming brought back. You step into a gym these days and it's like, you're in a lingerie department and I'm sorry, sweetheart, just because your mother told you beautiful doesn't mean it's appropriate for you to wear that stuff. I think there needs to be an element of shame kind of brought back into the women's side of things as well, because I know the struggles and I also see exactly what they're doing. And, if you kind of understand psychology and maybe some of these things, like, I know exactly why they're doing that. They may not even know. So I agree with that. We definitely need some elements of healthy shame. And I think all human beings need to be encouraged to level up and that you are better than your status quo. And, that's a big uh, meaning or it's a big driver behind our philosophy.
If I could just speak to that just real quick, just in case somebody's listening to this has never really heard of healthy shame, I just want to clarify what we're talking about, that like the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame is toxic shame says you are a bad person. Like there is something wrong with you and you are messed up. Healthy shame is saying that thing you did wasn't skillful. That thing you did caused harm for yourself or caused harm for other people. And it wasn't a wise action. And that's just the fundamental difference. So just so people are kind of aware of what that is. Yeah.
What, we're midway through 2025 here, right at the kind of halfway point. What's, what, if anything, new is coming down the pipeline for you in the organization? And where do you see yourself kind of, in the next 6 months of this year?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, the community that I run, it's going well. Like, we're a small kind of intimate group. We're growing slow and steady, but I like it that way. Like I don't want to get too big. And so I'm kind of actually in some ways turning that down and just focusing more on the podcast and YouTube channel, just creating more content. At some point I want to write a book. We all want to write a book about this kind of stuff.
It's a 3-year journey, bro. I just finished third rewrite copy this past week, man. And dude, it was a massive undertaking. Yeah. So we're excited to get that out soon.
I'll have to get some tips from you about the process. For me, it's been on the back burner forever. It's always been this thing where I'm like, yeah, someday I'll write it. But, just putting out more content, doing more interviews. Like I love things like this, connecting with people in this space because there's so many of us out there. It's like, it's this weird thing where I tell people what I do for work and they're like, wow, I've never heard of that before. And yet at the same time, when I look around, the podcast space, the YouTube space, there are so many people who are addressing this more and more, whether it's coaches or therapists or, scientists, amazing stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, man. And yeah, it's been incredible. Like I said, 6 years ago, I looked out into the space and there were a handful of people and I was able to get connected with them pretty early on, but it seems like there's a new guy popping up following me, or I'll see his content, or, I'll get shared something. I was like, all right, brother, I see you, man. Like, let's go, man. It's definitely not a competitive thing at all. There's billions of people in the world. And, I would be very prideful and egotistical to think that I'm going to reach every single one of them. I have a niche, I have an audience that I attract because that's who I am. And it's, similar yet different to you and, many of my other friends that are doing out there. So I think once again, we collectively all need to link up and unite and continue to support. So.
And I think, a great example of that, like Joe Rogan, like the way that he approaches that, where he's bringing on all of his quote unquote competitors, he's bringing all of his comedian friends and other podcasters. And, he has this mentality of like, no, like, there's no competition here. Let's lift all of us up. And so for me, it's like, I love, what you're doing here, like bringing on other coaches onto your podcast, because the more that we connect and unite, it just raises all of us up and raises the issue up. So yeah.
And that was the mission here, right? With creating this series, I could stand here in front of the microphone and, scream into it, and I've done that for 200 something episodes. And, we have the other podcast where we interview people in other fields and more conversational, but I was like, no, I need to shine light on this industry. So that's what the Coach's Corner here is all about. So Jared, I mean, as we bring this to a close, man, there'll be thousands of guys, hopefully millions over the years that hear this conversation. To the guy out there that is struggling, if you had maybe one thing of whether it's encouragement or inspiration to say to a man that's out there that is fighting through this, maybe alone or maybe with a group of guys, like what would you say to him to continue to encourage him to stay in the fights?
Mm-hmm. I would just tell anyone who's listening to this, like, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not messed up. You're not a pervert in any way. It's like, you are a beautiful human being that, has fought a lot of battles. And the fact that you're still here and still fighting is a sign of your strength, and to just keep going and get connected to a community, get connected to a men's group, a church group, a spiritual community of some sort, or even just, a therapist or a friend who you can talk to. Like, getting connected and allowing yourself to be vulnerable is probably the best thing you can do for your recovery. But that most important thing is just recognizing like you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's hope. You can change. A big part of my story was understanding neuroplasticity and understanding how the brain is constantly changing and rewiring. And even into your 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's still possible to change and heal. So, yeah.
You're changing every day. You know, are you going to be the one that's pulling the levers of change, or are you going to let the weapons that are out there dictate and control that change, man? Jeremy, brother, it's been an absolute honor, man. Guys, we'll have all of Jeremy's links, his socials, his podcast, information about his coaching, all that stuff plugged down there in the show notes. If you want to learn more, highly recommend giving him a follow. Check out his podcast, support his work. And if you're looking for a mindfulness meditation approach that's maybe not faith-driven, Jeremy is your guy, man. So, guys, we appreciate you hanging out here. Jeremy, it's been absolute honor. Guys, rate, review, and if you got a brother that's in a fight and needs to hear this, do us a favor and them the blessing by sharing this conversation with them. But your host, Coach Frank Rich, for Jeremy Lipkowitz, Coach's Corner, Episode 1. We love you guys. See you in the next one.